Before the palaces and the media chaos, there was another man in Meghan's story, Trevor Engelson, a Hollywood producer who once had her heart. He was the man who loved her, married her, and allegedly got dumped through the mail.
His name is Trevor Engelson. And tonight, we talk about what he knows. Good evening. What you are about to hear is not palace gossip. It is not a tabloid headline recycled from a slow news week. And it is not the kind of story that gets picked up by the mainstream press, because the mainstream press has a vested interest in keeping this particular door closed. We are not talking about rumors. We are not talking about anonymous sources whispering into a phone. We are talking about a documented timeline, verified accounts, and a man who spent 6 years watching Meghan Markle become who she is, a man who said nothing while the world built a mythology around a woman he knew better than almost anyone alive. A man who received a FedEx package and understood, in that moment, exactly who he had married. Before we go any further, I need you to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. What you are about to hear is not being reported anywhere else with this level of detail. We go where the mainstream press will not. So subscribe now, and let's get into it.
Reports even claim she sent the engagement ring back like a returned Amazon package.
Narcissist who cannot get enough of herself while she simultaneously plays the victim. My castle's too small. Yeah. The queen is mean to me. They won't let me call myself Her Royal Highness anymore, but I'm going to put it all over my stationery and on the gifts that I give to my friends, while she never stops.
Here is what strikes me every single time I sit with this story. Trevor Engelson is not a broken man. He is not a scorned ex-husband running to cameras with tear-stained receipts. He is a successful Hollywood film producer. He produced Horrible Bosses, a film that grossed over $209 million worldwide. He has built a career, rebuilt a private life, remarried, and by every documented account moved forward with quiet dignity. That matters. Because when a man like that stays silent for over a decade, the silence is not weakness. That silence is a choice. And choices like that always have a reason. Hi viewers, I want to ask you something personal and I want you to answer honestly in the comments right now. If someone you loved walked away from you without a single conversation, no phone call, no goodbye, just a package in the mail, could you ever forgive them? Yes or no? Tell me below.
Markle did plan this, but what is new in terms of Meghan Kelly's revelation is that it is Trevor Engelson, via an intermediary, who has revealed this story, this existence of the mood board featuring Prince Harry. And let's just remember for a moment, Meghan Kelly is one of the world's greatest independent journalists.
Now let me tell you why that question matters to this story more than you might think. September 10th, 2011. Jamaica. The sun was out, the setting was intimate, the guest list was tight. Trevor Engelson married Meghan Markle in a ceremony that people who were there described as genuinely warm. Genuinely joyful. This was not a performative event. This was two people who had spent 6 years building something together, standing in front of the people they loved most and making a promise. 6 years. Let that sit for a moment. 6 years of dinners and setbacks and industry rejection and early mornings and the particular kind of closeness that only comes from watching someone fight for a dream that has not arrived yet. Trevor was there for all of it. The small television roles. The background work. The auditions that went nowhere. The ones that almost landed. He was not a spectator in Meghan's early life. He was a participant. A supporter. By multiple accounts, a genuine one. And then Suits happened. The show premiered in June 2011. 3 months before the wedding. Meghan Markle, cast as Rachel Zane, suddenly had a platform, a profile, and a trajectory that was pointing somewhere neither of them had fully anticipated. The ink on the marriage certificate was barely dry before the ground started shifting beneath it. Here is what I want you to understand about that shift. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It did not announce itself with an argument or a moment of obvious fracture. It was the kind of slow, quiet erosion that is almost impossible to detect until you look back and realize the ground you were standing on has been gone for months.
He used Diana's favourite perfume. So when they met for the first time, gosh.
Meghan was filming in Toronto. Trevor was working in Los Angeles. The geography was a fact. But geography alone does not end a marriage. Something else does. By 2012, Suits was into its second season and Meghan Markle was no longer an unknown. Her social circle in Toronto was documented to have shifted. New connections. More influential ones. The kind that opened doors she had never had access to before. And through all of it, Trevor Engelson was back in Los Angeles, producing, working, waiting, and according to sources familiar with his circle during that period, gradually realizing that the woman flying back and forth to Toronto was becoming someone he was no longer fully recognizing. 23 months. That is how long the marriage lasted. From September 2011 to August 2013. The same amount of time, almost to the week, as Meghan's entire relationship with Prince Harry from first meeting to wedding day. That parallel is not a coincidence I invented. It is a documented timeline that sits there in plain sight, waiting for someone to look directly at it. And then came the package. No phone call. No conversation. No flight back to Los Angeles for a final, honest moment between two people who had given each other nearly a decade. According to reports from Page 6 and corroborated across multiple outlets, Meghan Markle sent her engagement ring back to Trevor Engelson via FedEx. A return package. A shipping label where a marriage used to be. Let me be direct about what that means. That is not how someone ends a relationship they ever fully inhabited. That is how someone closes a chapter they have already mentally left. The body goes through the motions. The ring in the envelope, the address written out, the package dropped off, but the person is already somewhere else entirely. Already in the next chapter. Already moving. Trevor Engelson stood there with that package. And he said nothing publicly. Not then. Not for the year that followed. Not when Harry and Meghan announced their engagement. Not when the wedding aired to a global audience of nearly 2 billion people. Not when the Oprah interview reframed everything. Not once. But here is what I need you to understand before we go any further into this story. Silence is not the same as having nothing to say. And a man who spent 6 years watching Meghan Markle before the world knew her name, a man who received a FedEx package where a marriage used to be, that man knows something. He witnessed something. He carries a version of her story that no palace briefing, no Netflix documentary, and no carefully managed interview has ever been able to account for. The palace did not ask Trevor Engelson what he knew before the wedding. Harry reportedly never sought him out. And the version of Meghan Markle that walked down the aisle at Windsor Castle in May 2018 was a version that had never been examined through the one lens that could have told the full story. What happens when the man who knew her first finally decides that silence has a cost? That is the question that has been building for years. And the answer, the real answer, is the part of this story that nobody in the mainstream press has been willing to sit with long enough to tell properly. We are going to tell it tonight. Stay with me. I want you to think about what it means to know someone before they become famous. Not the version they present to the world. Not the curated interviews or the carefully worded statements or the documentary footage shot with flattering light and deliberate framing. I mean the real version. The version that exists at 7 in the morning before the armor goes on. The version that shows up after a rejection. The version that reveals itself quietly, over years, in the accumulated weight of small moments that nobody outside the relationship ever gets to see. Trevor Engelson knew that version. He knew it for 6 years before a single camera followed Meghan Markle down a street. 6 years before a single headline carried her name. 6 years before the world decided it had an opinion about who she was and what she represented. And that is precisely why what he knows matters. Trevor Engelson was born in 1976 in Great Neck, New York. He built his career in Hollywood the way most people who last in that industry do, methodically, relationally, with a clear understanding that the business runs on trust and reputation above almost everything else.
He studied him. Now, if you do study him carefully, you can see he's very vulnerable, and you can see that he's yearning to get married. He told me that he really wanted children, but the time hasn't come yet, but he really wants to be a father because he loves being with children.
By the time he met Meghan, he was already an established producer with real connections and real credits. He was not a dreamer chasing an idea. He was someone who had already arrived. Meghan, at that point, had not. They met around 2004. She was 22, 23 years old, doing the work that most actors in Los Angeles do in their early 20s, small roles, background appearances, auditions that lead to other auditions. She had done a brief appearance on General Hospital. She was working as a freelance calligrapher to pay her bills. She was, by Hollywood's brutal standard of measurement, nobody yet. But she was working toward something. That part was always visible. People who knew Meghan during this period consistently described the same quality. The discipline. The intention. The sense that every room she walked into was being evaluated for what it could offer and every connection was being filed away for future reference. That is not a criticism. That is the description of someone who came from modest means and decided early that modest means was not where the story was going to end. Trevor saw that quality and he supported it. For 6 years he was present for the grind. The Deal or No Deal years, 2006 to 2007, where Meghan stood on a stage holding a briefcase in a sequin dress because that was the work that was available and she was not too proud to take it. The recurring guest spots on CSI, on Without a Trace, on shows that paid the rent but did not move the needle. The years of being almost but not quite. He was there for all of it. And then June 2011 arrived. Suits premiered on the USA Network and Rachel Zane walked onto screens across America and everything changed. Not slowly. Not gradually. The way a switch flips. Overnight, Meghan Markle had a platform, a following, and a future that was no longer uncertain. 3 months later, she and Trevor were standing in Jamaica exchanging vows in front of the people they loved. The timing is the detail that nobody talks about enough. 3 months. The show that would change her life premiered 3 months before the wedding. Which means that on the day Trevor Engelson married Meghan Markle, the trajectory of her career had already fundamentally shifted in a direction that would take her away from the life they were building together. Whether either of them fully understood that on the day is a question only they can answer. But the documented timeline speaks for itself. Here is what I find significant about Trevor's profile during this period. He never positioned himself as her gateway. He never leveraged her rising profile for his own. He did not become louder as she became more visible. If anything, the record shows the opposite. As Meghan's name started appearing in more conversations, Trevor's public presence remained exactly what it had always been: quiet, professional, industry-focused. That restraint tells you something about his character. It also tells you something about what it must have cost him when the marriage ended the way it did. Because here is the part of Trevor Engelson's story that gets overlooked in favor of the more dramatic details. This was not a short relationship that burned bright and collapsed under its own heat. This was 6 years of genuine partnership followed by a marriage. The investment was real. The foundation, from his side, appeared to be real. And the ending, a FedEx package, no conversation, no goodbye, arrived not as the conclusion of a deteriorating situation but as a sudden, unannounced termination. People close to Trevor during that period described him as blindsided. Not angry. Not vindictive. Blindsided. There is a particular kind of pain that comes specifically from being blindsided by someone you trusted completely. It is different from the pain of a mutual dissolution or even a bitter argument that ends badly. It is the pain of discovering that the version of the relationship you believed in was not the version the other person was living. It is the pain of retroactive confusion, going back through the memories and trying to locate the moment when the two stories diverged. Trevor Engelson went through that privately. Without a publicist. Without a camera. Without a single public statement designed to manage perception. And 6 years of being with someone before the world knew her name meant that what he was processing in private, what he was replaying and reconsidering, was a version of Meghan Markle that the world was never going to see. That version is the foundation of everything that follows in this story. Because what Trevor witnessed during those 6 years directly contradicts specific elements of the narrative that Meghan Markle has presented publicly since 2016. Not in ways that are ambiguous. Not in ways that require interpretation. In ways that are specific, documentable, and quietly devastating if you are willing to look at them directly. And I am willing. Stay with me. Because where this goes next is the part that the palace should have paid attention to long before May 2018. The marriage lasted 23 months. I keep coming back to that number because it matters more than people realize. 23 months is not a failed experiment. 23 months, after 6 years of dating, is a collapse. It is the kind of timeline that suggests the foundation was not what at least one person in the relationship believed it to be. August 2013. The divorce was finalized quietly. No press release. No coordinated statement. The legal end of a decade-long relationship process through the California court system like any other filing. But the way it ended was not quiet. The FedEx story broke through page 6 and spread across every outlet that covered celebrity relationships. An engagement ring. A shipping envelope. A marriage dissolved without the basic courtesy of a final conversation. Sources at the time described Trevor's inner circle as stunned. Not because the marriage had been visibly troubled, but because the method of ending it revealed something about the calculation behind it that nobody had seen coming. Think about what that decision communicates. To send a ring back by mail is to prioritize efficiency over dignity. It is to treat the ending of something as a logistical matter rather than a human one. It removes the possibility of conversation, of pushback, of any moment where the other person's response might complicate the exit. It is, in the most clinical reading of it, a clean extraction. That is not a small detail. That is a defining one. And it sits at the center of everything that happened next because it established, in the starkest possible terms, how Meghan Markle was capable of operating when she had decided a chapter was finished. No sentiment. No ceremony. A label and a drop-off. Now here is where the story shifts. By the time the ring was in the mail, Meghan had already been living a different life in Toronto for the better part of 2 years. Suits was filming there. The production schedule kept her in Canada for months at a stretch. And the Toronto that Meghan Markle inhabited during the Suits years was not the Toronto of her deal or no-deal briefcase days. This was a different world entirely. Her social circle expanded in directions that Trevor, back in Los Angeles, was not part of. New friendships developed. Influential ones. The kind that come with invitations to different rooms and introductions to different people and a gradual recalibration of what is possible and what is within reach. Corey Vitiello, a respected Toronto chef, entered her life relatively shortly after the divorce was finalized. That relationship was documented and public. It lasted until approximately 2016, which is the same year she met Harry. The timeline of Meghan Markle's romantic life, when you lay it out in sequence, shows a woman who moved with remarkable efficiency from one significant relationship to the next. Trevor, then Vitiello, then Harry. Each one arriving at precisely the moment the previous chapter had run its course. Each one representing a step into a larger, more elevated world than the one before. That is not a judgment. That is a pattern. And patterns reveal character in ways that individual moments cannot. Here is what I want you to sit with about the Toronto year specifically. Multiple sources who were part of Meghan's social world during that period have noted a shift in how she presented herself as Suits progressed through its seasons. The ambition that Trevor had known, the disciplined, focused drive of a woman working her way up from nothing, did not disappear. It refined itself. It became more sophisticated, more calibrated to the specific currency of the world she was now moving through. She was learning, in real time, how the upper levels operated. And she was a fast learner. Biographer Tom Bauer, in his 2022 book Revenge, documented palace concerns about what aides described as gaps and inconsistencies in the background information available about Meghan prior to the engagement. Bauer's reporting drew on multiple sources inside and adjacent to the royal household. The picture that emerged was of an institution that had significant private reservations and a prince who was not interested in hearing them. That detail is critical, because it means the information existed. The questions were being asked internally. People with access to the kind of research that royal engagements typically prompt were flagging concerns. And somewhere in the background of all of that, Trevor Engelson was living his quiet life in Los Angeles, carrying 6 years of first-hand knowledge that no palace researcher could replicate. Nobody called him. As far as the documented record shows, nobody reached out to the one person who had actually been there, who had watched the evolution happen in real time, who had experienced directly the way this particular person operated when the stakes were high and a decision had been made. Nobody asked Trevor Engelson anything. And the palace moved forward with a wedding that had an 85 million worldwide television audience and a bride whose pre-royal chapter remained, in critical ways, unexamined by the people who should have been asking the hardest questions. That is the crack in the foundation. And cracks, given enough pressure, do not stay small. What happened after the wedding is the part of this story that everyone knows. The deterioration of Harry's relationships with his family. The departure from royal duties in January 2020. The move to North America. The Oprah interview in March 2021 that drew a worldwide audience and fundamentally altered the public conversation about the British royal family. The Netflix deal. The memoir. The Spotify collapse. The gradual erosion of the Sussex brand from a position of enormous commercial promise to something considerably more fragile. All of it unfolded while Trevor Engelson said nothing. And Harry, the man who had everything to lose and arguably the most urgent reason to understand who he had married, had never done the one thing that might have given him the clearest picture available. He had never sat across from Trevor Engelson and asked him a direct question. Now I want to tell you about the moment this story becomes something more than a celebrity divorce. July 2016. A mutual friend introduced Harry and Meghan. The details of that first meeting have been told and retold, the casual dinner, the immediate connection, the sense that something significant had happened. Harry has spoken about it publicly. Meghan referenced it in the Netflix documentary. By the time the world knew about the relationship, in November 2016, the two were already deeply invested in each other. The courtship was fast. Remarkably fast. By November 2017, barely 16 months after they met, Harry was on one knee in the kitchen of Nottingham Cottage with a ring he had partly designed himself, incorporating diamonds from his mother's collection. Meghan said yes. The engagement was announced. The world responded with the particular mixture of celebration and scrutiny that follows any royal announcement. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Trevor Engelson learned about it the way the rest of the world did. Through the news. Let me stop here for a moment because this detail deserves more weight than it typically receives. Harry was marrying a woman whose previous marriage, a decade-long relationship compressed into a 23-month legal union, had ended with a FedEx package. That story was public knowledge. It had been reported extensively. Any basic research into Meghan's personal history surfaced it immediately. Harry knew about it. He has never publicly claimed otherwise. And yet the documented record, as reconstructed by Bauer and other serious researchers, suggests that Harry's response to any information that complicated his image of Meghan was consistent and clear. He did not want to hear it. Sources described him as fiercely protective of her narrative, resistant to questions, dismissive of concerns, and increasingly isolated from the advisors and family members who might have encouraged him to slow down and look more carefully. That is not a small thing. That is a man who had fallen for a version of someone and was not willing to examine whether that version was complete. Tom Bauer's reporting goes further. Palace aides, according to his sourcing, conducted the kind of informal background review that precedes any major royal engagement and came away with concerns they were not able to raise directly with Harry. The concerns were not about scandal in the tabloid sense. They were about consistency, About gaps. About the distance between the story being told and the documentation available to support it. And here is the devastating part. None of that internal concern translated into a single conversation with the man who had the most direct, most personal, most unmediated access to the information everyone was trying to piece together from a distance. Trevor Engelson. 6 years. A marriage. A decade of knowing. Sitting quietly in Los Angeles while the palace ran its searches and Harry planned his wedding and the machinery of a royal engagement moved forward at the speed of institutional momentum. Nobody called him. Think about what Trevor would have been watching during this period. The engagement announcement. The photographs of the ring. The carefully managed press appearances. The global enthusiasm. And running alongside all of it, visible only to him and the small circle of people who had been present during those earlier years, a private awareness of the distance between the public presentation and the version he had known. He said nothing. Not in 2017. Not when the wedding aired in May 2018. Not during the Oprah interview, which aired in March 2021 and made specific claims about the experiences Meghan said she had within the royal family. Not when the Netflix documentary arrived in December 2022. Not when Spare was published in January 2023 and Harry's account of his life and marriage became one of the best-selling memoirs in recent publishing history. Through all of it. Silence. But here is what I need you to understand about that silence. It did not mean agreement. It did not mean validation. It did not mean Trevor Engelson watched all of it and thought, yes, that tracks, that is the person I knew. Silence, in this context, is a posture. And postures are maintained for reasons. Here is the detail that reframes everything. In 2019, Trevor Engelson married Tracy Kuland, the daughter of a prominent California philanthropist. By all documented accounts, the marriage is stable, private, and genuine. He has built the kind of life that looks, from the outside, like a man who processed something painful and came out the other side with his integrity intact. Meanwhile, the man who replaced him in Meghan's life was, by 2023, living in a rented mansion in Montecito with a collapsed Spotify deal worth $30 million, a Netflix partnership under commercial pressure, a memoir that had permanently damaged his relationship with the British royal family, and a public profile that had shifted from beloved prince to something considerably more complicated. Trevor Engelson moved forward quietly. Harry did not. That is the documented reversal at the heart of this story. The man Meghan left via shipping label rebuilt. The man she chose publicly unraveled. And the institution that failed to ask the most basic questions before the wedding is now living with the consequences of that failure in ways that have no clean resolution. Here is what makes this specific. If Trevor Engelson decided tomorrow to sit down with a journalist, a biographer, or a documentary filmmaker and speak on the record about those 6 years, the conversation would not be speculation. It would not be rumor. It would be first-hand testimony from the one witness with the deepest and most sustained access to who Meghan Markle was before the world had an opinion about her. That testimony does not exist publicly yet. But it exists. It exists in Trevor's memory, in his experience, in the accumulated weight of a decade that nobody has ever been allowed to examine through his eyes. And the longer he stays silent, the more valuable that silence becomes, because every new chapter of the Sussex story adds context to what he witnessed, and every new public claim adds potential contrast to what he knows privately. The palace should have asked. Harry should have asked. Neither of them did. And that failure of curiosity, that willingness to move forward without examining the one available source who could have provided the clearest picture, is the quiet catastrophe running underneath everything that came after. Let me walk you through the most likely scenarios from here. Because Trevor Engelson is not a passive figure in this story, even though he has chosen to behave like one. His silence has a shape. It has a weight. And the question of what he does with what he knows is one of the most consequential unresolved threads in the entire Sussex narrative. Scenario 1. Trevor stays silent indefinitely. This is the highest probability outcome based on everything the documented record suggests about his character. He has maintained this posture for over a decade through extraordinary provocation. The Oprah interview alone, with its specific claims about Meghan's experiences and character, would have given a less disciplined person ample reason to respond publicly. He did not. The Netflix documentary, which presented a version of Meghan's life story that his years with her would complicate significantly, aired to a global audience. He said nothing. Spare landed on shelves with Harry's account of his marriage and his wife and the life they had built together, and Trevor Engelson did not issue a single public response. If he has not spoken yet, there is a reasonable argument that he will not speak at all. But here is the problem with that scenario. His silence does not make the questions disappear. If anything, it amplifies them. Every year that passes without a public account from Trevor is another year that the gap between what he knows and what the world has been told grows wider. Silence in this context is not neutral. It is a presence. Scenario 2. Trevor speaks through a third party. A memoir, an authorized biography, a documentary made with his cooperation. This is a medium probability outcome, and the window for it is not permanently closed. Publishing incentives for a first-hand account of those 6 years are significant, particularly as the Sussex brand continues to evolve in unpredictable directions. A serious, carefully managed account from Trevor, not vindictive, not sensational, simply honest, would command enormous attention and would introduce into the public record a perspective that has been entirely absent. The challenge is timing. Too early and it reads as opportunistic. Too late and the cultural moment will have moved on. There is a window, and Trevor would know better than anyone when it opens fully. Scenario 3. The information surfaces through institutional channels. This is the lowest probability but the highest stakes outcome. If the Sussex legal and public conflicts escalate to a point where the royal family has a direct institutional interest in the documented record of Meghan's pre-royal history, the quiet details that have never been aired publicly could become relevant in ways that go beyond celebrity narrative. Legal proceedings have a way of surfacing material that no amount of careful image management can keep contained. If that scenario unfolds, Trevor Engelson's position changes entirely. He is no longer a private individual maintaining a dignified silence. He becomes a witness. And witnesses, in formal contexts, do not get to choose what they remember. There is no good outcome in any of these scenarios for everyone involved simultaneously. There is no version of this story where the full picture emerges painlessly. There is no path that preserves all of the narratives currently in circulation while also accommodating what a man who spent 6 years with Meghan Markle actually knows. The foundation was built on an incomplete version of someone. The palace did not ask. Harry did not look. And the man who could have provided the most honest account available went home to Los Angeles with a FedEx story and a decade of context and chose, for reasons that belong entirely to him, to keep it private. But private is not the same as gone. And gone is not the same as resolved. Now I turn it over to you. What do you think Trevor Engelson should do? Type silence if you believe he should maintain his privacy and let the story fade. Type speak if you believe the full account of those 6 years deserves to be part of the public record. Type wait if you believe he is holding this for the right moment and that moment has not arrived yet. If you believe that truth matters more than convenience, and that the people closest to a story have an obligation to history if not to the public, smash that like button right now. Because make no mistake, Trevor Engelson is not finished being relevant to this story. The Sussex narrative is not stable. The legal pressures, the commercial pressures, the ongoing public debate about what actually happened and who was actually responsible, none of it is resolved. And somewhere in the middle of all that unresolved tension is a man with 6 years of first-hand knowledge, a FedEx story that the world already knows, and a private account that nobody has been allowed to access yet. The next move is his. And when it comes, if it comes, nothing about the story you think you know is going to look quite the same. We will be watching. And so will the palace. Coming up next, we are going into the Spotify collapse in full detail. $30 million. A deal that was supposed to define the Sussex brand. A single podcast series that raised questions nobody has answered publicly. and the specific moment when someone inside the deal reportedly said out loud what everyone else was thinking privately. You do not want to miss that one. The documents tell a story that the press releases never did. Stay with us.